Here we are on Easter Island, most remote place on this planet. Will globalization hit us? There's no doubt that it will, and it's being done.
La globalización llegó muy de repente, en muy poco tiempo. En esa gran bola de nieve se va tragando todo. Cultura, niños, abuelos, va todo ahí.
The island has to develop, like any culture is changing.
Todo esto no es de aquí. Todo esto viene de afuera. Hasta la lengua tengo que hablar de para que quede la cama. ¿Hasta cuándo?
We're destroying our planet. This is our home, our only home, and it's this small.
Muchas cosas que empezaron a ocurrir acá. Muchas cosas fuertes también. Son cambios de conciencia que está llamando la isla también a su gente a sensibilizar.
So we're back. I hope you enjoyed tonight's film. And we are about to start our Q&A. Just a couple of reminders. Please fill out our survey. It's in the chat box, in the link. There's a link in the chat box on OVEE. And your opinion is very important to us. So we'd appreciate you just copy it and save it for later and then fill it out after tonight's event. Also, if you have any questions for the speakers tonight, just put that into the OVEE chat box. And I will transfer it to our moderator, Andy Shalal, who will be moderating tonight's conversation and introducing our speakers. And also just a reminder that Eating Up Easter is going to air on WHUT on Independent Lens Thursday, July 2nd at 8 p.m. You may want to tell your friends about that screening or that broadcast that's coming up. And it repeats on Friday, July 3rd at midnight for those of you who are night owls, as they say. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope to see you next week for Recorder, the Marion Stokes project. So I'm going to turn this microphone over to Andy Shalal.
Thank you so much, Mishan Boston has been working with us on this collaboration for some time. These films are always very exciting, and they're always so well done, and this is no exception. This is a fantastic, beautiful film. I want to say a very special thank you to WHUT, to Lama Haj and Alex of WHUT for allowing us to be part of this as well. And with us, very exciting, of course, are the filmmakers and producers and directors, Sergio Rapu and his wife, Elena Rapu. They are the filmmakers. And with us is also the Reverend Yearwood. He's a community activist. A lot of you know him. He's the president of the Hip Hop Caucus, which is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that empowers young people to participate in elections, policymaking, and service projects around racial and environmental justice. And this is very apropos to have him as part of this. So the name of the film is Eating Easter Island, and Easter Island is the other name for the island, which is called Rapa Nui. Why did you choose to name it by the anglicized name as opposed to the original name or the native name of it? I want to turn to Sergio and Elena.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us here. We're really excited to be part of this conversation, especially as it pertains to the community there in DC. You know, for those, I think a lot of people know about the heads, the moai. Some people have heard about Easter Island, but rarely people can point it out on the map. Usually, and like, this was way back, they would put the legend of a map right on top of our island. So we're really kind of, you know, we're out in the middle of nowhere. But we knew Easter Island was something that the West, you know, Americans, Europeans would kind of understand, we'll get to. And really that was our audience in making this. We knew from the onset that we were telling a story not for our community on Rapa Nui, but we were telling a story for the other, the outside.
I wanted to ask you, the film specifically is about the struggle between modernity and tradition. It's about adapting. It's about the environment. It's about so many things, you know. It's sort of, it's, you know, as you said, the island is like a microcosm of the entire globe, at so many levels and so many issues. Capitalism plays into it. Environmentalism, of course, plays into it. There are so many aspects of what your tourism, ecotourism, trade, everything sort of plays into it. What were you hoping that you can get out of it? Why did you make the film?
I think we had a couple of different goals going in, and then as we initially, I think we had worked in tourism on the island in a number of different ways, and we really wanted to help educate people coming to the island about the place they were coming to, because we were seeing more and more tourists coming, just kind of expecting their life to continue the way it had where they came from, and not really fully understanding the remoteness of where they were, the impact they were having, the amount of things that they were, the types of food or drinks or things that they were wanting on the islands, and how far those things were coming, the kind of trash that was coming in when those things were arriving, all of that. So we wanted to create something that would educate people like that, and that also would educate people further outside that there is a vibrant, living, modern population on the island. Most of the media about the island is about the history and about the Moai, and you never see the living people. You don't even, oftentimes the narrative is that the people have died out. And there was a large population collapse after European contact and disease, and 1,500 islanders were taken away as slaves to Peru. So they lost their population, but it was not something that happened prior, or it may have been in decline, but it's not something that majorly happened, but prior to European contact. So that, and then the other thing is that people did survive. And so the story of adaptability was important to us to carry through, that people did not, were not wiped out. This population is still there today. They're coming up with solutions. They're like active agents in their world, in this development that's going on in their island, and they're making choices about how to build their future. And so they're sort of in this unique position to do their development happens so late in their in history. Sort of, they've had the opportunity to watch many other people go through it, and so there's a lot of people doing it very thoughtfully there and consciously, and very well educated about making the choices that they're making. Not everyone, obviously, but we wanted to highlight some people in the film that were doing that. And then I think after we kind of worked through that, we realized the film could have a larger impact and speak to people all around the world in different ways. And we wanted to keep it complex and complicated, and have all these different elements in there so that people could relate to it, come at it in any way that made sense to them, and see that this tiny remote island so far away is not that different from them. And we share humanity all around the world, and we all are kind of fighting the same battles, and we can learn from each other by sharing that. So
well, you did that really well. And did you want to say something, Sergio?
No, I think she got it. I mean,
yeah, she did. She nailed it, as we say. But one of the things that the thread that comes through is this one woman, Mama Peru, who is a powerhouse. We were talking about this earlier. I said all we need is a couple of her, and we can change the entire world. I want to turn to the Reverend Yearwood. You know, sometimes we kind of deitize certain people, make them heroes, and they become kind of the focal point. Everybody kind of relies on them to make the changes that people either choose not to do, or feel maybe too lazy to do, or don't have the time to do. what is the role of activists in this kind of situation? I mean, again, using that island as a microcosm for the entire globe, or what we're doing here in this country. What do you see the role of activists?
No, Andy, that's a great question. But first, let me just applaud you on a magnificent film. You guys did great. And I love this film because, you know, in my work as an environmentalist, so many times people think the movement is just predominantly white people, and people of color and people from around the globe are not engaging with what it needs to be done to take on the issue of the climate crisis, the issue of recycling, the issue of plastic, you know, and so seeing this film was so powerful. Mama Peru is a good example, but seeing this film and seeing that and highlighting the island and how people are using literally things that are coming against them, not only to clean up, but to create buildings and create music centers and all those kind of things is exciting. And I just applaud you for that, because the way that we will broaden this movement is not by looking at the same people, but knowing that many people are concerned about the climate crisis for the next generation, which leads to, exactly what Andy, your question is, the role of the activist. You know, Mama Peru was amazing. I mean, you're right. I can actually see another, you can do a part two of this of just her. You can just follow her around, because she was phenomenal. And I think that Andy was mentioning, a lot of times we hold up certain activists and certain people in roles. And sometimes we don't understand that there's so many layers to the process that go on. I'm originally actually from Louisiana, and it's funny, we had a Mama D, and Mama D was someone who was very powerful when Hurricane Katrina hit. As a matter of fact, this is the 15-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, when we lost 1,900 people when the storm hit, but we've lost for the past 15 years, many more because of heartbreak, and many, many more for the children who are, this is kind of because they kind of been floating along for the past 15 years. And so, you know, the Mama D was an activist like on Peru, in which she literally was, and this is a very deep moment to show you how this climate crisis is real. When Hurricane Katrina hit, Mama D could have left. She didn't leave, but she was literally catching the bodies of the senior citizens who were floating down her street and tying them to a tree so that the history and the culture of her community would not be lost. She said, I'm not gonna let these folks who are 80 and 70 years old float away. Me and her and her son caught them. And so, like in Peru, there's this kind of, and I want to highlight this too. There is no movement without women, because what I've seen, to me, honestly, over and over and again, the power of women in our society to just uphold that is amazing. So I just want to say that the role of the activist, not to uplift them, but just to the structure of that, the layers of what it means to build a movement is important. I also just want to say, I like the fact that you talked about resources in this, and you know, you had that kind of dichotomy going on, which you were talking about what it means to kind of build up structures on this island, but also what it means to have that friction. So you did an amazing job. I just want to say, I'm so glad to see this film. I actually happened to see it. I was doing Earth Day. I didn't know I saw it, but I actually saw it doing Earth Day, and it was great then. It was great now. So I just applaud you for, and it was beautiful too. I also just want to say, as a Black person, we're dealing with the racial justice. You looked at the culture of the people so powerfully to tell their stories in a way that you said that there was another story that clearly went on before the settlers came, which was also very beautiful as well.
I wanted to ask you, you know, again, the role of activists obviously is very important, but oftentimes structural change is left out, right? I mean, you talk about activists, you know, there's moments of change, but structural stuff doesn't really gets impacted hugely. In fact, I would argue that activists sometimes get in the way of structural change at some level. You know, course, I'm painting a very broad picture here. I wanted to see, I mean, and this is to you, Reverend, and also go back to Sergio and Elena, to talk about, is it possible to have this sustainable space that respects the culture, respects the people, respects the environment in a capitalist society that really looks for gains that have nothing to do with people, but have to do everything with capital? Is it possible to meld the two together? Can capitalism be, can it work in this situation? And maybe Reverend Nui, would you first, and then we'll turn to Sergio and Elena.
Yeah, that's a we need a couple of hours to deal with that one, Andy.
Yeah.
This is the lightweight response. But let me say this to that. Yeah, it's actually
the film touches on that a little bit, but I wanted to go deeper.
It does. No, it's yes and no, and I know it's probably and that's the one thing about it is that you know, the ideas of capitalism unfortunately looks upon society sometimes to extract and not to respect the people. And it loses out on the fact of the matter that you're just looking to make a profit and make money. And sometimes when you're in that system, clearly you become a system where you're not concerned about the people or the culture. All you're concerned about is your bottom line. And that's one of the problems with the climate crisis, is that we have an extractive system. We have a solution to the climate crisis, but folks want to continue to make money off of the old system, off of fossil fuels, so they just won't transition to a new system. So that's exactly the problem with capitalism. But as we saw in the film, is exactly. I mean, there's a difference between that extractive system that wants to just take advantage of people, to a system that really wants to make a living. We saw that in the effort of when they were trying to make the mall, for instance, in the film. Clearly, we saw that through many different layers of how the island, in essence, is making money from tourism and that aspect. So, and then how they're using that to promote the culture. So I think there's a fine balance, but there's a thin line between when it becomes, it can be good and it can be evil. But there's a thin line between the good and the evil.
I want to turn to you, Sergio and Elena. One of the dangers of making a film like this is people will notice the island more, and you'll get more and more people wanting to go there, because I definitely want to go there now.
I was the same way.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, of course, tourism as a double-edged sword. Tourists bring their trash with them, and they bring their, some of them aren't very culturally connected to the space. You said the most positive tourists are the ones that are impacted by the place where they go. And yes, they may be impacted by the place where they go, but they leave. And they leave behind sometimes lots of things that may not be very good for the island. And in particular, when there's a dependence on tourism, you can lose that, right? And then the island is stuck. Like, for instance, in this situation where you have the COVID-19, and the pandemic going on, if you're just dependent on tourists and you start becoming more dependent and suddenly everything closes, you're basically out of luck, So how do you create this balance in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult question to answer. I sometimes think about that. Really, if the Earth, if our environment was another human being, and we could have like an emotional connection to this other human being, our understanding and our relationship with that other person would be a lot better than it is now. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have disconnected so much from our environment, and even our dependence on the environment has moved us away from like our understanding or even maybe caring about our own impact on the environment. On an island in Rapa Nui, you also see this in Hawaii and a lot of other communities, we see like the borders of our space. you know. Beyond that, there is oceans, miles of oceans that we cannot survive, that we cannot live in. And so our impact, our immediate impact there is very visceral. We're based in Minneapolis. It's a very big city. We do not see the loads and loads of trucks of food that come in to feed us. We don't see what happens to all of the garbage and the recycling that, you know, after we put it in that dumpster, it just disappears. And so there's a lack of sort of transparency in a big city that you don't necessarily have on an island. So in trying to solve all of this, you know, I'll go with the Reverend Yearwood. I think it's a careful balance of implementing emotional compassion into this capitalism, this mixture of capitalism. Like, another element of profit also needs to be how are we sustainable? How are we as a company going to survive 100 years, 1,000 years from now, if we're just sort of reaping the benefits immediately right now? And I think this changes generationally. You know, the way that my dad grew up, he grew up in an incredibly poor economy with very little goods, with very little even opportunity for an education, those types of things. And so as he grows, that sets his bar for what is good, what is, you know, what does prosperity look like, right? For our generation, who now is, I would say, one of the wealthiest in Chile because of what our ancestors did hundreds of years ago, our understanding of where we want to be is different. So I have a lot of hope for our future, because I believe that the young people today are maybe in some ways a little bit rebellious towards older generations that see capitalism in a traditional way. This is what I hope. You know, I know maybe not everyone is, but I think that there is a careful balance, and I think with tourism too. People, it's about caring for people and about caring about the place that you go and where you're from. That's my attempt at answering a very difficult question.
It's very good, but I'm hopeful too. I wasn't as hopeful until about 3 weeks ago when these protests started happening here, and I see the we used to think of the millennials as being kind of self-absorbed and into their world, and to their iPhones and everything else.
Yeah, we still are.
Yeah, no, but what we didn't realize is you guys were fortifying. You guys were getting ready for the big moment, and you catch it when you see it. It's very interesting, and I'm sure that's happening. It's the exciting part is not just happening here in the United States, but it's across the entire globe. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the art and culture, because that was such an important part of the story, right? So what do you feel is the role of art and culture and ritual, especially in Rapa Nui, in moving issues of social justice, of the whole idea of getting people on board to move forward? I want to ask you, Elena, and Sergio first, and then I want to turn to Reverend Yearwood, because obviously hip hop is part of it, is an important part of American culture, African American culture in particular. And what do you feel is the role of that as well in making movements happen? So let's turn to you guys first, and then to Reverend Yearwood.
Well, living on Rapa Nui, we are very much all related. It's a big family, and so Mama Piru can really kind of call you out. It's when she calls you out on the radio, and when other people do, everybody's listening. And so it's public shaming in some way. It works really well in that community. You know what I mean? And in the same way, art, the adaptation of our traditional art practices, music, song, dance. There's a lot of people that actually try and push the bounds a little bit by singing in the native tongue, using sort of traditional hymns, but like shifting the words a little bit to incite a little, like poke at issues that are happening in the community. So often during this Tapati festival, there will be one or two performers that would go up and they'll sing a song about a particular individual. They don't name that individual, but everybody in the audience knows who they're talking about. You know what I mean?
That's the beauty of having an island of a couple thousand people. It makes it much easier to do that.
Yeah. But I think art has that power. Art has the power of pushing you into being slightly uncomfortable but okay, and sort of shifting your kind of understanding of something. It's maybe also akin to like traveling to a new place. I like the idea that the travel is necessary in some capacity to shift you out of like your normal way of being. And when you are put into this different mindset, or you look at something you've never really seen before, and it gets you start to thinking about something else, this is where sort of real internal change can happen. It just gets sort of like, the juices flowing towards that. So I think that's what, works really well on a tiny island in Rapa Nui, but also, in various parts in the US, like art is in many times a catalyst for positive movement.
Absolutely. Reverend Yearwood, you are the Hip Hop Caucus, right? I mean, for the hip hop, of course, the important part of American culture, African American culture. Why hip hop?
You said why hip hop?
Yep.
Well, I mean, I think it is a form for those to use their cultural expression to shape their political experience. Mm-hmm. And so in that, that could be any culture, any kind of music, but that's for hip hop. It was those in this country who were left out, those who were redlined, those who were moved to the margin. They needed a voice, or they needed to reclaim that voice. I think in this film, one of the most powerful things that really touched me was in the beginning. I think Sergio had mentioned he was talking to his baby at that time and was saying that the one thing about me, my parents traveling, is that I didn't learn the language. And so, for me as an African American, the one thing that is so poignant is that our language was in essence stolen from us. When we were a stolen people, then we weren't allowed to then practice our native tongue from the continent. And so you see that, and that's the one thing for many of us, we grieve, and it hurts us when you, not only did they steal our culture and our art, they even stole our divinity. They even said that this God, this form of faith is now the one you should follow because it's what it is. And so we even took on the religion of our slave masters in many cases. And so I think that art then allows for us in a very unique way to reconnect with our ancestors. It's almost like a tunnel. There's something about drums and beat and music and art and poetry that somehow in now media and movies that somehow teleports us back to a time when we can then utilize the art to help us to reconnect our humanity.
Absolutely, and I think you see that over and over again, where any movement that doesn't, who was it that said that I don't want to, if your movement does not have dance, I don't want to be a part of it. I think it was Emma Goldman, the anarchist at the turn of the last century said that, and that's really true. I mean, that's why I think even in the demonstrations we're seeing today here in the States and throughout the world, of course, there's a lot of dancing, there's a lot of music. And some people are critical of that, right? They think like, this is serious stuff. You can't be dancing, you can't be singing, but they miss the point, right?
They missed the point. Also, it's therapeutic. I think that many of us, you guys from Minneapolis, so that you can actually lose your mind if you don't have something to dance to. Because if you think about what is literally happening, that literally the state you're paying taxes to is killing you sometimes for the color of your skin, that can almost cause you to just lose it in some aspects. And so in that, keeping it together, it sometimes comes through the art, the music, the gospel, the poetry. That allows us to realize that no, there's something else that we can still connect to, that so that we cannot lose it, even though we see everything around us falling apart.
I want to stay with you for a moment, Reverend Yearwood. We're coming to the close of our conversation. For a moment, there's a huge movement happening. Again, I've mentioned it a couple of times here throughout the world and here in the United States. Where do you see this movement going vis-a-vis not only the issues of racism that everyone is addressing, of course, but also the issue of climate justice, the issue of racial justice, all of that? Where do you see that movement going?
Well, the first thing is that the issue of climate justice and racial justice are connected.
Yes.
And I think for the first thing that people are now seeing those two together, and that's actually very powerful. They were always together, let me be very clear. They weren't separated, but we're now seeing it together. I'm actually very encouraged, and I'm like you, I'm actually very encouraged by what I see. There is a little different than our parents. Our parents, were primarily fighting for equality. And obviously we're still fighting for equality, but we're not only fighting for equality, but we're also fighting for existence. And so there's a time clock for what we're fighting for. The reality for the climate crisis is that we know by many reports that, there's about 10, 12 years before the climate crisis becomes, etched in stone, so to speak, and we can't change. We'll just be living with this madness for our children. So there's a certain urgency, I think, that we see now where we're combining that we must fight this issue of the climate crisis, but we're also seeing at the same time, we must also do the issue of how we treat one another, how we're dealing with folks who want to love or who they want to love, the issue of immigration, the issue of literally racial justice. So I think there's a new movement that simply says that this world that we're going to create for ourselves and for the next generation is literally going to put humans first. That's the reality, that we cannot live in a place, we can't leave this for our children and our children's children, a world that is only based on destruction and extraction, but a world that simply says that we care about one another and that we are all human together. And in that world, we win.
Sergio and Elena, I wanted to turn to you for the last word to tell us, first of all, what do you hope people will walk away that watch the film today? What do you want them to do? What is the action steps that people should be thinking about at this point? And what is next for you?
Yeah, well, we've always hoped that this film engages people to think about really their own habits, particularly when it comes to the consumption of things and needing things versus wanting things. I think one of the best ways forward is really for us to reduce a lot of of our own impact that we have, and that really means letting go of a lot of the complex, expensive pleasures that we have and finding those simpler, maybe more important ones. And I think a lot of those are being underscored for many of us. I know definitely in our family during this pandemic time, during this lockdown, it's about family. It's about experiencing the outdoors as best as little as we can, and so we hope that people move forward with thinking about how they, even in the smallest bits, can have an impact, and how they too can, as a community, in their own community, gather together to further that impact. Again, even with our family and in Minneapolis, we're realizing that our island is our block, our neighborhood. Like, these are the people that we need to grow with, that needs to heal also, but we can do a lot of amazing things with, and we don't have to look much farther than that.
How about you, Elena?
Yeah, I would agree. I think our hope with the film is that it will spark dialogue in communities and in households about what you can do right now, and how you can get involved, and just sort of inspire you that there are a lot of people out there dreaming big, and you can be part of that, or you can be inspired by that, or join somebody else who moves you. And we all just have to, like Enrique says at the end of the film, like we all just have to start working. We have to do the work, so that we all can survive and our children can have a world that they're proud of.
Well, the film certainly has inspired me. What is next for you guys?
Well, we have a couple of projects that are, a bit on hold, but we're trying to figure out how to get them done. We've been working on a new feature doc about water in the Great Lakes area, the importance of water. Again, sort of environmentally themed, and also developing another one about food security in Hawaii, which really, we are trying to tell these bigger stories that can hopefully get people thinking throughout the country about, we definitely have been thinking about our own food security in Minneapolis and many other places. So, yeah.
Well, very good. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you guys, the Reverend Yearwood of the Hip Hop Caucus, and Elena and Sergio Rapu of the film that we just saw, Eating Easter Island. So thank you so much, and thank you, Michonne Boston and WHUT and everybody involved in putting this together. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
It's been
everybody.
wonderful. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.